Hello and welcome to a revision video looking at whether the defeat of the Spartacists was the main reason for the establishment of the Weimar Republic being successful by 1919. For the purposes of this revision video, we'll be arguing that it was not the Spartacists that were the main reason the Weimar Republic was able to be established by 1919, but in fact it was loss of military support that was the most important, closely followed by defeat of the Spartacists, and then President Wilson's pressures, and finally the unpopularity of the Kaiser. So let's start by looking at the importance of the loss of military support for the war in establishing the Weimar Republic by 1919. So loss of military support for the war was a key reason for, the most important reason for the Weimar Republic being able to be established. And probably the best evidence for this is the Kiel Mutiny, which happened between the 4th and 5th of November in 1919. Initially, it involved around 3,000 sailors who refused to follow orders to for further readiness for battles and things during World War One, and they seized control of their ships. And then the Kiel Mutiny becomes really significant when the army sends 40,000 soldiers to theoretically put this mutiny down, and in actual fact what happens is that most joined it, and those that didn't join it went home. So the mutiny was really significant. It showed that the generals were losing control of the armed forces, which was obviously a huge threat. And we can see how significant it was because on the same day as this Kiel Mutiny, or sort of second day of this mutiny, that's when Max von Baden, on the 5th of November, sends the peace note to America asking for an armistice for a temporary ceasefire, showing how worried the German government were about this loss of military support for the war. They didn't feel that it was possible to continue fighting. And this obviously was a key reason for the establishment of the Weimar Republic and the abdication of the Kaiser, because without the support of the armed forces, the Kaiser was no longer able to continue fighting the war, and would therefore be forced to abdicate. The military were also quite significant in enabling the establishment of the Weimar Republic because they agreed to the Ebert-Groener Pact. So General Groener agreed that the army would, the leaders of the army would support the establishment of the new republic, so long as the leaders within the armed forces were able to keep their positions of power. Most of them were sort of aristocratic and didn't necessarily originally have their positions due to their training or their experience. So the Ebert-Groener Pact also shows that the military were a key reason for the establishment of the Weimar Republic because they supported it mainly to keep their own positions of power, but also because they wanted to prevent any further revolutionary change in general within the country as well as within the army structure. And they would have had good reason to do this. In Russia, just the previous year in 1917, there had been a full-scale communist revolution, and that's what the leaders of the army in Germany were worried about in 1918 and early 1919. And loss of military support for the war, and more importantly for the Kaiser, also helped in the establishment of the Weimar Republic by 1919, because even when most of the soldiers in the army were decommissioned after World War One as part of the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, but also kind of earlier than that as well, we know that around 250,000 ex-soldiers became members of the Freikorps, so private militia or ex-army personnel, and that these Freikorps were key in putting down uprisings like the Spartacist uprising, where around 30,000 Freikorps were used to help squash the rebellions. So, loss of military support for the war and the support of the military for the establishment of the new Weimar Republic were key reasons for the Weimar Republic being able to be established by 1919. Without their support, either the war may have continued being fought, in which case there would have been no reason to give in to Wilson's demands for Germany to become a democracy, or they would have been unable to put down left-wing rebellions, and there may have been a communist revolt like there was in Russia when Russia left World War One. The second most important reason that the Weimar Republic was able to be established by 1919 was the defeat of the Spartacists. So the Spartacist uprising was a significant threat to the Republic. It did last only 7 days, but that's still a considerable length of time. And there were around about, numbers vary, but between 50 and 100,000 at its height, striking workers in Berlin. And Liebknecht and Luxemburg, the leaders of the USPD, were taking advantage of the fact that there were such a large number of people on strike and in the same place in Berlin. And they attempted to use this group of striking workers to continue what they saw as a Marxist revolution that they thought had started when the Kaiser abdicated. And it was a significant threat, not only due to the large numbers of people involved, but also in how difficult it was to put down. Around 100 people were killed in the fighting. The government actually had to move from the capital city in Berlin to Weimar, and the new republic was actually named after Weimar, the town in which the government temporarily relocated to whilst this uprising was going on. So obviously this uprising was particularly significant. And the Weimar Republic were only able to hold their first democratic elections, officially, properly kind of starting as this new democratic republic, this country, just 4 days after the rebellion, on the 19th of January 1919. However, the defeat of the Spartacist uprising was clearly not as significant as the loss of military support for the war and sort of the support of the military of the new Weimar Republic for allowing its establishment, because the defeat of this Spartacist uprising wasn't the end of all left-wing rebellion. It was just a temporary end to this specific left-wing rebellion. So it did help with making it easier to organise the national elections that they were trying to hold for the new country, and it did stop there being any full-scale communist revolution like there had been in Russia at the end of World War One, but it was not an end to all uprisings. So, for example, only a couple of months later, in April 1919, in Bavaria, 8,000 communists tried to seize power and around 700 people were killed. So it's not as significant as the loss of military support for the war and the military supporting the establishment of the new Weimar Republic, because without their support it's unlikely that it would have happened. But it certainly was important in stopping any kind of further rebellion or communist revolution, as it were. The third most significant reason for the establishment of the Weimar Republic being successful by 1919 probably was President Wilson's influence, or America's influence. And this is because as part of his 14-point plan, Wilson implied that there was a need for democracy in order to ensure lasting peace across nations, and what he saw as better trade as well. And more specifically, in the two telegrams that Wilson sent in response to von Baden's peace note, he stated very explicitly that the Allies would only deal with a democratic Germany to negotiate an armistice. And it was this demand that led to people like von Baden and the SPD as well, so people like Ebert, suggesting that it was completely necessary for the Kaiser to abdicate rather than kind of working with him to negotiate peace. However, although Wilson's demands for Germany to become democratic were a real pressure that did encourage the Kaiser's abdication, it's unlikely that this would have happened if the military could have continued fighting, if they felt that they had enough support from their troops. For example, some of the army generals like Ludendorff, when he heard the response from Wilson, were so infuriated that they actually wanted to go back to war, but they couldn't due to the fact that they had mutinies like Kiel, showing that they just didn't have the support from their troops. So whilst Wilson was putting significant pressure on Germany, and it did encourage the abdication of the Kaiser and Germany becoming a republic, it's not as important as the loss of military support for the war and key military figures deciding that they're going to support the new Weimar Republic in favour of avoiding a full-scale communist revolution. And then finally, probably the least important reason for the establishment of the new Weimar Republic was popular support for the idea of democracy and sort of unpopularity of the Kaiser's rule. So obviously Weimar did offer a significant change. They were offering sort of equal suffrage rights for women and things like that. And we know that the SPD was one of the largest parties that sort of existed before the establishment of the Weimar Republic, and that they supported democracy. So obviously there would have been support for the idea of this new republic. And we know that the Kaiser was unpopular due to failures to sort of deal with issues during the war. For example, in 1916, around 80,000 children had starved to death due to malnutrition during the war. We know that there was a lack of coal, sort of coal shortages due to lots of miners being conscripted and sort of other mistakes like that being made. But ultimately, whilst these things made the Kaiser unpopular, most countries within Europe had similar sorts of issues during wartime, and there wasn't a revolution in every country. And again, whilst it's true that there was support from some groups for democracy and the Kaiser's abdication, other groups really only supported the new Weimar Republic because they saw it as the lesser of two evils. So, for example, the group of around about 250,000 Freikorps that existed by 1919 that helped put down major rebellions like the Spartacist uprising and the uprising that occurred in Bavaria in April 1919, those Freikorps were only really supporting the new republic because they wanted to avoid a full-scale communist revolution. And so they saw the new republic as the Weimar Republic as being the lesser of two evils, not quite as bad as a full-scale communist revolution. So, in conclusion, the defeat of the Spartacist uprising, was it the main reason for the successful establishment of the Weimar Republic by 1919? No, it wasn't. The most important reason was the loss of military support for the war, closely followed by defeat of the Spartacist uprising to prevent full-scale communist revolution, then Wilson, and then least important, popular support for democracy. I hope that this has been a useful revision video. Best of luck with your ongoing revision. Don't forget to try and plan similar questions on a similar theme but with a slightly different twist. So for example, you could try reworking some of this evidence into a question looking at something like what was the cause of the Kaiser's abdication? So was loss of military support the main reason for the cause of the Kaiser's abdication? In that question, you obviously wouldn't discuss things like defeat of the Spartacists because that happens sort of in the early days following that abdication. So just have a go at perhaps planning a similar question like that. Or equally, it would be very useful for you to find sources on this topic in your textbook and have a go at analysing them using this content when you're looking at contextually whether or not the content of the sources are true and how reliable the provenance of the source might be. Best of luck with your revision.